Hey everyone, Manero here, and welcome to the second week of Brushtober 2021, an October event where I create a Procreate set with 31 brushes that is going to be entirely free for all my customers. If you want to know how you can get it, check out the info in the description below or watch my previous video for all the details. In this video, we are going to have a look at the 7 brushes I created this week. So let's jump right into it. For day 3, I wanted to create a brush using a very cool texture I had saved in my photo gallery some time ago. It's a texture that I knew it would be cool to use because, as you can see, it generates this sort of bubbles that can be more subtle or more obvious depending on how much you press with the Apple Pencil. I immediately thought on some kind of mud or slime, so I ended up calling this brush Mudy Slime. In honor of the name of the brush, I thought it would be fun to paint some kind of monster made out of mud. So I started with defining the general shape of the monster, and I knew I would want to have its mouth wide open to show some of that gross muddy liquid dropping from the top part of its mouth. I tried to take full advantage of the texture of this brush that really gave me the feel I was looking for, and then I just painted along with it, emphasizing the round bubbly shapes in the darker spots and the highlights in all the surfaces facing up. I also wanted to give it glowing eyes inside some dark and deep eye sockets. To complete this illustration, I added a shadow under the character to add the feeling that it is standing somewhere. I also added a colorful blue circle behind the monster to make it more visually appealing. Well, at least all the appeal a muddy monster can have. For day 4, I made this Rake Brush. Rake brushes are pretty popular, and I made a few myself in the past that you can find in some of my brush sets. But I always find it fun to make a new one because Rake brushes can be so different one from another. This one, for example, feels very inky to me, and it has a very nice distressed texture that shows up more or less depending again on the pressure you apply. Rake brushes are pretty cool to quickly do some manual cross-hatching too. I call this brush Inky Rake. For this illustration, I found this cool photo reference by Donald Teal that I thought it was perfect to draw a portrait from with this brush. One of the things that I like the most about this Inky Rake brush is how you can lay down your strokes without worrying too much about the details. And then you can go in with the same brush, but with the eraser tool to refine the edges of the strokes, add negative lines to the texture, and so on. It kind of forces you to think in only 2 values, light and shadow, and I find that very interesting to experiment with. At the end, I decided to try adding a 3rd value, like a mid-tone, with a slightly blue color, and I think it worked out pretty cool. For day 5, my goal was to work on an interesting brush for inking comics. I love inking brushes with a lot of texture and personality, so I haven't tried many times to do something more simple but yet effective, so I decided to give it a go. This brush is perfect for those who just like to do very clean lines with bold strokes and easy to control thin to thick line work. I call this brush Super Clean. For this brush, I wanted to do an illustration inspired by the typical skulls from the Mexican Dia de los Muertos tradition. I thought it would be a lot of fun to draw tons of skulls full of detail and decoration in their faces. I also wanted to experiment with the composition, so first I did the main skull in the center of the image using bold black lines, and then I used the radial symmetry tool to draw the rest of the skulls behind the main one, using blue for the lines. I think that helped to make the central skull the main focus on this illustration and have the other ones stay in the back, achieving this pretty cool effect. I also like how the composition turned out with those blue skulls spinning around the main one in some sort of spiral. Pretty cool stuff. In all art challenges that take place through an extended period of time, There has to be always a day or two that doesn't catch you inspired at all. And this is what happened to me on day 6. I made this brush called Soft Cracks because it's a very soft brush with a very subtle texture that is barely noticeable, but if you look for it you can see it. I really like this brush, don't get me wrong, but for some reason my lack of inspiration made me suffer a lot when I was doing the illustration for that day. I painted this illustration with this character like coming out of the dark, so I imagined the color palette to be very blue and dreamy. I thought the idea was cool, but I was struggling a lot with my execution. I think the part that was making me suffer the most was her face. I explained in a previous video about how to overcome art block, how hard I find for me to draw or paint female characters, so I guess this wasn't any surprise to me. But as I mentioned in that video, I think when this happens, it is important to finish the illustration even if you're not feeling very happy about it. So that's what I did. I added the words from the name of the brush behind the character, and I thought the yellow made the illustration a little more interesting. And at the end, I also added these cracks in her body, trying to bring the theme all together. I still wasn't super convinced about this illustration, but working with this brush was nice. For day 7, I broke my curse and felt really inspired again. I made this super fun to use brush that creates these beautiful particles in different sizes that feel very painterly, random and awesome. You can also use it with the smudge tool to blend between the colors. I thought that you could probably paint some artistic space imaginary with this brush, so I called it Dynamic Nebula. I wanted to test my theory, so I decided to paint a colorful space illustration. I started from a dark blue and purple background, and then I added colors from dark to light on top. I wanted to have two different areas so that the colors would go from cold on the bottom left to warm on the top right, with a dark separation in the middle. This way I could then paint some sort of nebula in the middle and make it super colorful and vibrant against the dark background, making it pop. As you can see, I used the very same brush with the smudge tool to blend the colors here and there. Once I had all the beautiful colors in place, all I needed to do was to add some stars. For that, I made the brush very tiny and I started to paint individual stars very carefully. The main trick to paint convincing stars is to paint them in groups of 2 to 4 stars together. Instead of painting single stars, spread out through the canvas at a similar distance from each other. Once I had a few stars, I could then duplicate the layer and rearrange the new batch, and then repeat until I had the whole canvas covered. Notice that I also made the stars smaller at some point. I thought they would look better if they were smaller and we could fit more stars. Then I locked the alpha in the stars and I painted some of them purple and others orange to make them look like they were far away in the distance. And I painted others pure white to make them look closer to us. I also used some blur and bloom to make the stars glow. For day 8, I made this brush that reminds me of those rolls with a stick that people use to paint walls. It has a very clean stroke with quite a rectangular shape, and the opacity changes a little bit with pressure, but not so much that you have to worry about it. It is meant to add some slight and random opacity variation in your strokes. I call this brush Paint Roll. As I was starting to play with this brush, I thought it would be cool to use it to make an ink drawing as if this brush was some kind of black marker with a square tip, and then use the same brush but in a larger size to finish the drawing using flat colors. What I found out is how cool it is to make a stroke with this brush and then use the eraser tool with the same brush to polish the shape of the stroke. It gives your lines another kind of flavor that I really enjoyed. I also liked how graphic the colors can look when painted with this brush. I think it's very cool to think about the placement of each color in a way that the shape of the strokes are part of the design. For day 9, I made a watercolor brush. It has a wet behavior as any watercolor brush should, but what I like about this one is that it also has some random spots where the pigment is going to look more dry, which is something that usually happens with real watercolor on paper. You can also use this brush for blending with the smudge tool, of course. I call this brush Watercolor Party. I wanted to paint something in a more academic way, so I grabbed this cool photo by Margot Panjon for reference. This brush could probably benefit from adding a paper texture to the illustration, but as a general rule for Brushtober, I try to work only and exclusively with the brush I created for that day, so I can see what the brush is capable of by itself. And I have to say, this brush does a decent job at mimicking the watercolor effect. The colors blend nicely with each other, and you get this classic watercolor dark edge in the strokes. And that's it for today. These are the 7 brushes I did this week for my Brushtober Challenge 2021. I hope you liked watching the process. If you did, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next video and give me a thumbs up. Also make sure to check out my Gumroad page and consider purchasing something before the end of October to get this unique brush set for free. I have tons of Procreate brush sets available and I'm sure something will suit your artistic needs. All the links are in the description below. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.